The most unsettling truth about manipulators is that they rarely appear dangerous. They do not carry the marks of villains carved onto their faces, nor do they announce themselves with threats or violence. Instead, they walk among us wrapped in politeness, in ordinary smiles, in gestures so common that they slide beneath our attention without resistance. They dress like everyone else. They speak like everyone else. They move through the same routines, and precisely because of this they become invisible. What separates them is not appearance, but intention. Every interaction, no matter how small, carries with it an unseen calculation. Where most people speak casually, manipulators listen carefully, weighing every response, studying every detail. Where most people act spontaneously, manipulators act with design, ensuring that even the most trivial moment leaves them with information they can later use. And yet, despite this, they never radiate menace. In fact, they often radiate safety. They present themselves as allies, as sympathetic listeners, as harmless companions. They laugh at the right moments, not at the right pauses, mirror your emotions with uncanny accuracy, and in doing so convince you that you have found someone who understands you more than most. But behind this mask of normalcy, a different reality is at work. Every smile is an experiment. Every pause is a test. Every gesture of kindness is not merely kindness, but a way to probe where your walls are strongest and where they are thin. The danger of manipulators lies in this camouflage. We expect predators to show fangs. We do not expect them to wear the face of a friend. And so we let them in. We sit with them, we speak freely, and we unknowingly hand them the blueprint of our inner world, never suspecting that one day those same details will be sharpened into weapons. The mask of normalcy is their first and most essential tactic because it turns suspicion into trust and trust into opportunity. What makes this mask so effective is how naturally it blends into the fabric of everyday life. If someone screams, threatens, or dominates, defenses rise immediately. The body tenses, the mind sharpens, and we instinctively prepare to protect ourselves. But when someone appears ordinary, agreeable, and even generous, our vigilance dissolves. The manipulator knows this instinct well and exploits it with patience. They do not need to rush. Their power grows slowly, like roots spreading beneath the soil where no eye can see. In casual conversations, they gather fragments of your history. In moments of vulnerability, they listen closely, offering comfort while silently memorizing your insecurities. With every encounter, they build a map of your psychology, your fears, your desires, your weaknesses, your loyalties. What seems like a simple conversation is, to them, a dissection. And because their questions never feel invasive, because their presence feels safe, you never think to resist. You reveal more than you intend. You share what you would normally guard, and you walk away believing you have simply spoken with a friend. This is the genius of the mask of normalcy. It does not force itself upon you. It invites you to open the door yourself. Once inside, the manipulator does not strike immediately. They wait. They observe how you react to different tones, how you respond to subtle cues, how your emotions shift with particular words. They study not just your words but your silences, not just your choices but the hesitation before you choose. In these gaps, they find the pathways into your mind. And as this process unfolds, they never break character. They continue to smile, to nod, to laugh, to share in your stories as though they were nothing more than ordinary companions. To outsiders, they seem harmless. To you, They seem trustworthy. By the time the mask begins to slip, its work is already complete. The manipulator has woven themselves into your trust so deeply that even small red flags are dismissed. You explain away the odd moments, the strange coincidences, the subtle contradictions. They didn't mean it that way, you tell yourself. I must have misunderstood. This is how the mask of normalcy defends itself, not by staying flawless, but by making you unwilling to question it. We do not want to believe that someone we trust, someone we feel safe with, could be secretly shaping our lives for their own benefit. To admit this would mean admitting that we have been fooled, that our intuition failed, that we gave away power we thought we held. The mind resists this realization with everything it has, and manipulators rely on that resistance. They know that once they have entered your circle of trust, you will protect them against your own suspicions. And so even as their influence deepens, you cling to the image they first presented. You remember their smile, their kindness, their moments of support, and you use these memories to silence your doubts. In this way, the mask endures long after it should have shattered. By the time truth becomes undeniable, the manipulator has already taken root in your decisions, your emotions, your sense of self. You cannot simply walk away, because their presence has become woven into your story. That is the quiet brilliance of shadow tactics. The manipulator does not conquer with open force, but by persuading you to invite them in. They do not storm the gates, they are welcomed through them. And when the damage is finally visible, when the control is finally recognized, you find yourself looking back at every smile, every laugh, every casual conversation, and seeing them not as harmless moments, but as carefully placed steps in a strategy you never noticed. The mask of normalcy is not just their disguise. It is their weapon. The shadow never announces its presence. It stretches quietly, taking shape only when light falls upon it. And in the same way, subtle influence thrives not through commands, but through whispers that feel like your own thoughts. The manipulator knows that raw power is crude, too obvious, too likely to spark rebellion. But suggestion, soft, invisible, carefully planted, is the perfect instrument of control. They move in conversations like a composer arranging notes, letting their words linger, fall, and dissolve into the silence where your mind eagerly fills the gap. You believe the silence belongs to you, that the conclusion you reach is yours, but in truth, the manipulator has already built the frame in which your decision must fit. This is the essence of hidden strategy: to steer without appearing to steer, to bend without appearing to touch, to weave choices into your path, so that the steps you take feel like freedom while they are nothing more than choreography. Subtle influence hides in the pauses of dialogue, in the way a question is shaped, in the hint of approval that passes across their face when you say something they wish to cultivate. They rarely tell you what to do. Instead, they let you hear yourself choosing it. This is why so many never recognize when they are being guided. They cannot feel the strings because the strings have been buried beneath the skin of their own desires. The manipulator learns what you crave: validation, love, recognition, or relief from guilt. And then they simply tilt the ground so that all your steps roll toward their design. No pressure, no threats, only gravity. And because you cannot see gravity, you cannot resist it. By the time you realize you are moving where they want you to move, you have already arrived at the destination. This is how power survives in plain sight, not through open domination, but through the invisible architecture of suggestion. The brilliance of subtle influence is that it disguises control as coincidence. A manipulator does not need to shout orders when they can tilt the air in such a way that you breathe in agreement. They frame their statements like possibilities, like ideas worth considering, never like demands. What if you tried this? Have you thought about that? It might be easier if words so soft they pass through your defenses unnoticed, yet once inside, they settle like seeds. Over time, those seeds take root, and you begin to believe the growth belongs entirely to you. You tell yourself it was your insight, your decision, your revelation, but the soil was already prepared, the water already poured, the sun already directed by the one who planted it. And because you think the fruit is yours, you protect it, defend it, and even argue for it against others. This is the manipulator's genius, not merely to shape what you do, but to make you guard their influence as though it were your own will. People imagine manipulation as puppetry, strings pulled crudely from above, but that image is too visible, too easy to resist. The real craft lies in making the strings disappear, in burying them so deeply into the rhythm of your thoughts that to cut them would feel like cutting yourself. They lead by appearing to follow. They suggest by appearing to listen. They steer by appearing to step aside. And because you never see the moment of intrusion, because you never feel the pressure of control, you mistake the hand guiding you for the echo of your own heart. By the time you understand how far you've been carried, it feels impossible to separate where you end and where they began. This is the quiet violence of subtle influence. It erases the boundary between choice and control, leaving you convinced that your cage is a path you freely chose to walk. What makes this tactic terrifying is not simply its effectiveness, but its invisibility. We defend ourselves against commands, against threats, against visible chains. But who defends themselves against agreement? Who raises shields against encouragement? The manipulator's art is to enter through the doors you keep wide open, to use the very things you long to hear as the pathways into your decisions. Praise becomes a leash. Approval becomes a compass. The gentle nod, the small smile, the approving silence. These shape your actions more than criticism ever could. Because criticism hardens us, but approval softens us. We crave it. We chase it. And when someone offers it with precision, giving just enough at just the right moments, we begin to move unconsciously toward the pattern they desire. What appears to be affirmation is in truth redirection. What appears to be encouragement is in truth design. And once you are shaped by these unseen cues, once your choices have been nudged so consistently that they align with their hidden blueprint, you no longer need to be guided. You will carry the influence within you, like a compass you believe to be your own. And this is the final mastery of shadow tactics, to create in another person a self-guiding system that continues the manipulator's work long after their presence has faded. They no longer need to whisper, because their voice is already alive in your head. They no longer need to push, because you will push yourself along the lines they drew. To live under such influence is to walk willingly inside a cage you cannot see, believing with each step that you are free. This is not domination in its loudest form, but in its quietest, the art of writing choices into your life with such care that you mistake control for destiny. True control rarely comes through commands, it comes through the heart. Manipulators understand this better than anyone, because emotion is the unseen current that guides the mind, the force that can bend perception, distort judgment, and make decisions feel inevitable. They do not argue endlessly. They do not confront or coerce. They touch the parts of us we cannot defend, the quiet vulnerabilities we hide even from ourselves. fear, guilt, love, shame, longing. These are the levers they pull, invisible to the eye but impossible to ignore. You do not notice the tug until it has already moved you. They watch, they wait, and they learn which chords will resonate with you, which memories will echo, which hopes will be easily twisted. A single phrase, delivered at the right time, can ignite a cascade of emotion that guides you exactly where they want. Even intelligence cannot shield against this, because it is not the mind but the heart that bends first. And while the manipulator's touch feels like empathy, concern, or gentle guidance, it is always a strategy, an experiment in leverage disguised as care. They measure the subtle shifts in your posture, the way your voice changes with certain words, the fleeting hesitations and excitements that betray your deepest desires. Each reaction becomes data. Each reaction becomes opportunity. Each reaction becomes a step in a choreography that you will not recognize until it is complete. By the time you realize you are being pulled, it is not a sharp tug, but a river current that has already carried you far from the place you thought you controlled. The brilliance of emotional influence is that it hides in plain sight, masquerading as connection, concern, and understanding, while quietly reshaping your decisions and your perception of reality itself. The manipulator's brilliance lies in their ability to weaponize what we feel most intimately. Love becomes a leash, guilt becomes a chain, and fear becomes an invisible whip. They do not simply provoke emotions, they direct them with precision, shaping your reactions so that every choice feels inevitable, every hesitation feels dangerous, every longing feels necessary. You may think you are acting out of concern, loyalty, or desire, but in reality, you are moving along a path laid out by someone who understands the invisible architecture of feeling better than you do. They know which memories to awaken, which regrets to exploit, and which hopes to magnify until they become irresistible guides. And because emotion cannot be fact-checked, cannot be reasoned with, and often cannot be resisted, the manipulator holds a power deeper than logic alone could ever achieve. Arguments fall flat, explanations become irrelevant, because the current of feeling has already swept you into its course. Even subtle gestures, a raised eyebrow, a carefully measured pause, the softest encouragement, can become tools of influence, bending your choices without your awareness. And yet, because these shifts occur within your own emotional landscape, you defend them, justify them, and even believe you are acting freely. By the time recognition dawns, it is rarely anger that surfaces first, but confusion, self-doubt, and a haunting awareness that your own heart betrayed your mind. This is the invisible architecture of manipulation. To use what you feel most strongly not for understanding or connection, but for control, and to do so with a subtlety so refined that you cannot see it until it is woven into the very fabric of your decisions. The most dangerous aspect of this strategy is its invisibility. People prepare for battles they can see, for lies they can hear, for threats they can identify. But emotion is a battlefield hidden beneath the surface, where manipulation leaves no visible mark. You do not notice the chains because they are made of longing, guilt, and hope, materials you carry willingly, unaware that each step strengthens the hold someone else has over you. Manipulators are masters of timing. They know when to provoke, when to soothe, and when to vanish, leaving you to make decisions under pressure, but within a framework they constructed long before you were aware. Even when you recognize the influence, the threads are already woven into your identity. You argue, rationalize, and make choices that align with their hidden design, believing they are yours alone. This is why emotional leverage is both silent and devastating. It does not break you in moments of confrontation. It shapes you over time, like water carving stone, until resistance feels impossible and obedience feels natural. You may find yourself defending them against your own instincts, justifying the manipulation as care, loyalty, or necessity. And because the influence is rooted in your own emotions, leaving it behind is not a matter of rejecting someone else's control, but of untangling the control that lives inside you, a task far more painful than confronting any external threat. In this quiet, invisible way, manipulators operate in plain sight, touching your deepest feelings and turning them into instruments of unseen power, leaving you to wonder not who controls you, but how you could ever have given them such influence without noticing. Kindness can be a weapon more subtle than a blade, and manipulators understand this instinctively. It is not the harsh hand or the cruel word that most often bends someone to another's will, but the gentle touch, the unexpected favor, the support offered just when it is needed most. They cloak control and warmth, draping influence across gestures that appear generous, protective, or selfless. When someone opens a door for you, offers advice, or provides help, you rarely question the intent. You receive it as kindness, gratitude, or relief. The manipulator knows that in these moments, suspicion is the enemy. If you were to see the pattern, to trace the purpose, the control would unravel. But wrapped in the illusion of benevolence, even the tightest chains feel like comfort. A gift, a compliment, a thoughtful act, these become invisible threads. You do not feel the tug because you welcome it. You embrace the very mechanism that binds you. Over time, the accumulation of small favors, carefully timed interventions, and feigned generosity builds a network of indebtedness. It is quiet, invisible, and relentless. And you cannot resist gratitude without feeling cruel, or suspicion without feeling paranoid, because every act of kindness disarms the mind before it can consider danger. By the time the pattern emerges, by the time the recognition of manipulation is possible, the web is already too intricate, the connections too deeply embedded in your sense of self and social expectations, and leaving it behind feels not only difficult, but almost immoral. In this way, the shadow of kindness becomes a tool to obscure true intent, leaving control invisible in the light of what seems humane, benevolent, or natural. The manipulator's gift is never neutral. It is always calculated, always measured to provoke dependency. They know precisely when to offer help, when to appear compassionate, and when to withdraw it, creating a subtle rhythm that teaches you to rely on their presence. Every favor, every act of support, carries with it a quiet obligation, a weight you feel but cannot quantify. Gratitude becomes a leash. Appreciation becomes a cage. And because these bonds are built on positive emotion rather than fear, they are harder to resist, harder to detect, and far more enduring. People defend the kindness they have received, even when it serves someone else's hidden agenda, because human nature resists acknowledging that warmth can be deceptive. We are taught that generosity is good, that helping hands are signs of trustworthiness, that compassion is to be reciprocated. Manipulators exploit these instincts with precision, transforming societal and personal virtues into tools of subtle domination. They create a world in which saying no feels cruel, refusing help feels ungrateful, and questioning intentions feels unnatural. Slowly, Almost imperceptibly, they turn your natural tendencies, empathy, courtesy, gratitude, into instruments of their influence. And by the time you realize the pattern, you are caught in a paradox. To resist is to betray your own sense of morality, and to continue is to surrender your freedom. The shadow of kindness operates precisely in this space, using what you value most, connection, empathy, trust, to craft a system of invisible control that is as elegant as it is untraceable. Over time, the true danger of this tactic becomes clear. It creates not only influence, but silence. People are reluctant to speak against those who have been kind to them, even when the kindness is manipulative. This hesitation is exactly what the manipulator relies upon. They understand that the greatest prisons are not made of walls or bars, but of gratitude and obligation. You do not see the constraints because you welcome them. You do not resist because you feel indebted, and the very act of resisting threatens to make you feel morally wrong. They engineer situations where gratitude and guilt are intertwined, where every refusal feels like a betrayal and every acceptance feels like a duty. In this way, the person being manipulated becomes complicit in their own restraint, unknowingly defending the hand that guides them. And yet, because the manipulator's acts are framed as generosity, these chains are invisible to outsiders as well, creating a sense of social legitimacy that reinforces the effect. By the time the connection between kindness and control is recognized, the manipulator has already secured influence that runs deep, shaping decisions, emotions, and perceptions without ever raising suspicion. This is the silent genius of shadow tactics, to wield power not through fear or force, but through the careful orchestration of benevolence, allowing control to flourish in plain sight, hidden behind a facade no one wishes to question. You are left to wonder whether it was kindness that led you, or whether it was always strategy cloaked in the softest light, the shadow beneath the warmth that seemed so natural. Control is often measured in what is said, but mastery of influence is measured in what is left unsaid. The manipulator understands that silence can be more devastating than words, that omission can twist reality more effectively than outright lies. In every interaction, there exists a space where what is withheld becomes a guide, shaping perception without anyone noticing. Questions left unanswered, details left unmentioned, truths concealed behind plausible deniability. These are the threads that form the web of silence. You fill the gaps yourself, your imagination constructing the missing pieces, and in doing so, you act exactly as they intended. It is subtle, invisible, and nearly impossible to detect until it is too late. The absence of communication is used as a mirror, reflecting fears, assumptions, and expectations back at you, making you complicit in the very structure that confines your understanding. When you attempt to question reality, the manipulator's silence becomes a barrier. They do not argue. They do not defend. They simply remain still, allowing you to wander into the conclusions they have orchestrated. And because humans are conditioned to seek coherence, to make sense of incomplete information, the gaps created by silence are filled with your own reasoning, and yet every inference serves their agenda. The brilliance of this method lies in its invisibility. You are guided, restricted, and molded, yet the source of the influence appears to vanish the moment you search for it. It is a trap that does not bind your hands, but it binds your mind, and like any carefully constructed snare, the victim rarely sees the net until escape is impossible. In this way, silence itself becomes a weapon, a structure of power that operates quietly in the daylight, invisible because you are convinced that no one is pulling the strings. The manipulator's silence is never accidental. It is deliberate, timed, and shaped to maximize uncertainty. Every pause, every withheld comment, every carefully chosen moment of inaction is designed to leave you unsteady, to make you question your own memory, judgment, or understanding. You begin to fill the empty spaces with assumptions, drawing conclusions that align perfectly with their hidden intentions. What feels like confusion, hesitation, or indecision on your part is actually a carefully engineered response, guided by the gaps they created. People often mistake these pauses as indecisiveness or think they are responsible for miscommunication, when in reality, they are dancing on strings they cannot see. The absence of explanation becomes a mirror reflecting your own doubts and fears, and those reflections are precisely what the manipulator wants you to act upon. Over time, the web grows more intricate. Silence follows silence. Omissions compound, and each unspoken word builds pressure that guides behavior without confrontation. You begin to act not in rebellion against their influence, but in alignment with it, filling the voids they left strategically. Even your attempts to clarify, to probe, to understand, are anticipated and subtly redirected, as though your efforts themselves are another thread in the structure. This is the quiet genius of their method, to shape choices and perceptions not through force, but through the absence of information, through a choreography of gaps, pauses, and unspoken rules. And because the effect is invisible, those caught within it rarely perceive it for what it is until the consequences have already been etched into their decisions, relationships, and sense of self. The true power of this strategy is how it converts uncertainty into control. By carefully managing what is not said, the manipulator transforms your own mind into an instrument of their influence. You begin to anticipate their silence, to question your assumptions, to doubt your interpretations, and in doing so, you comply with patterns they designed long before you realized the game had begun. Even confrontation becomes ineffective because the weapon is no longer the silence itself, but your response to it, the endless mental negotiation you perform, trying to fill voids, seeking logic where none is provided. And yet, because these gaps are constructed within familiar contexts, between friends, colleagues, family, or lovers, the influence feels natural, even inevitable. You cannot escape it without escaping the framework of your own trust. And leaving that trust behind is not easy. It feels like abandoning reason, morality, or loyalty. This is why the web of silence is so dangerous. It does not dominate openly. It does not attack with force. It works quietly in the daylight, shaping the contours of perception, bending intentions, and guiding actions, all while appearing harmless, even benign. Those caught in it do not realize they are guided until the manipulator has already stepped back, leaving them moving in directions preordained, defending choices they believed were their own, reacting to cues they cannot see, and wondering how freedom ever felt possible. In the theater of shadow tactics, silence is the invisible stage, and the unwitting participant plays their role flawlessly, convinced of their independence, blind to the architecture of influence hidden in the spaces between words. The ultimate mastery of subtle control is not merely in bending others to your will, but in convincing them to defend the very hands that bind them. Manipulators understand that fear and influence are fragile alone. They require reinforcement from within the target's own sense of morality, loyalty, or love. To achieve this, they craft relationships in which dependence and obligation intertwine, shaping a reality where victims begin to guard their own restraint, defend their own ensnarement, and rationalize the manipulator's actions as necessity, kindness, or inevitability. The brilliance of this strategy lies in its invisibility. The manipulated become complicit, often willingly, in the very system designed to constrain them. It is not coercion in its raw form, but a psychological sleight of hand, turning empathy into allegiance, gratitude into guardianship, and fear into protection. The more the victim values the manipulator's approval, care, or attention, the deeper their unwitting participation becomes. Every favor, every gesture of kindness, every carefully timed support is remembered, rationalized, and reinforced as evidence that the relationship is essential and that defending the manipulator is, in some way, defending oneself. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the victim begins to internalize the manipulator's agenda, repeating it, advocating for it, and even punishing themselves for resisting it. What appears from the outside as loyalty is often the internalization of control, a self-enforced obedience that protects the manipulator's influence more effectively than any visible threat or command could. In this dark architecture of trust and dependence, the boundaries between oppression and choice blur, and the victim becomes both prisoner and warden, unknowingly sustaining the very system that confines them. Manipulators engineer situations so that the victim's sense of responsibility is redirected toward defending the manipulator's agenda rather than recognizing their own entrapment. Every request, every expectation, every subtle demand is framed as a test of loyalty, trust, or gratitude, and the victim begins to internalize these expectations as moral imperatives. They argue for the manipulator's actions to themselves and to others, explaining inconsistencies, justifying betrayals, and rationalizing coercion in ways that make resistance feel impossible. The more the manipulator demonstrates control disguised as care, the more the victim embraces the role of protector, guarding secrets, defending intentions, and shielding the manipulator from scrutiny. This process is reinforced by carefully orchestrated praise, validation, and approval, which the victim craves and interprets as confirmation of their righteousness. In this way, the manipulator does not need to maintain constant pressure. The victim sustains it for them. The chains of control are no longer external, because the victim has internalized the manipulator's strategy, carrying it forward through loyalty, fear of loss, or perceived duty. The tragedy of this method is that those caught in it often cannot see the pattern. They believe themselves to be the champions of what they value most, unaware that they have become instruments of their own restriction, defenders of a system built to shape their behavior, emotions, and decisions. In this silent collaboration, the manipulator achieves a level of influence that is nearly impervious. Even if confronted, the victim will defend the manipulator's choices, suppress doubts, and rationalize every act of manipulation as necessary or justified, perpetuating the control without awareness of its origin. By the time awareness begins to surface, the victim is often already so entangled in the manipulator's design that recognition feels like betrayal, not liberation. Every memory of kindness, every acknowledgement of support, every reminder of shared history becomes evidence to reinforce obedience and protect the manipulator's image. The mind instinctively seeks consistency, and to accept the truth would require dismantling the very identity that has been carefully shaped through months or years of subtle influence. In defending the manipulator, the victim is defending a version of themselves, one that trusts, cares, and honors perceived obligations, even when these obligations work against their own freedom. This is why escape from such control is profoundly difficult. The victim does not only face external manipulation, but internalized self-policing, a mental structure erected to maintain alignment with the manipulator's objectives. Even those with strong reasoning or moral judgment find themselves caught in the paradox. Resisting feels wrong, yet compliance ensures continued restriction. The manipulator has created a system where power is exercised not through overt dominance, but through the internalized participation of those they seek to control. The victim, once thought to be passive, becomes an active agent in perpetuating their own constraint, unknowingly upholding the very network designed to guide their choices and shape their emotions. In this final phase, the shadows are complete. Influence has moved from external pressure to internal conviction, and the manipulator, though often unseen, achieves mastery by turning the manipulated into guardians of their own imprisonment, sustaining the system with loyalty, gratitude, and the illusion of freedom. The most insidious form of manipulation is not overt coercion, but the gradual erosion of awareness itself. Those who operate in shadows understand that true control is not taken by force, but by shaping perception so subtly that the boundaries between reality and influence blur until the victim no longer recognizes them. Over time, repeated exposure to strategic guidance, selective omission, emotional leverage, and cultivated loyalty erodes the mind's ability to discern intention from happenstance. Decisions that once felt deliberate and autonomous begin to carry the fingerprints of another's design, and yet the victim remains convinced of their freedom. This collapse does not happen suddenly. It is a slow drift, like a river carving through stone, imperceptible until the landscape is irrevocably altered. The manipulator does not need to push or coerce. The framework they built ensures that the victim will participate willingly in their own restriction. Trust, once a foundation of connection, becomes a tool for shaping perception, memory, and action. Gratitude, empathy, and loyalty are quietly redirected, reinterpreted, and weaponized so that the victim unknowingly guards the very system that confines them. And because the manipulator remains in plain sight, often praised for insight, charm, or wisdom, the victim rarely considers the possibility of subversion until they find themselves trapped within choices, alliances, and behaviors that feel inevitable, natural, or deserved. This is the final stage of shadow tactics, when awareness itself collapses, leaving no one to resist, no one to question, and no one capable of seeing the architecture of influence that has silently rewritten the rules of their reality. Once awareness begins to fade, the manipulator's influence becomes self-sustaining. The victim no longer requires constant direction because their own thoughts, decisions, and actions have been subtly aligned with the manipulator's objectives. Every choice is filtered through a framework shaped by prior guidance, omissions, and emotional nudges, making resistance feel unnatural, even impossible. Doubts that arise are quietly dismissed, rationalized, or absorbed into the narrative the manipulator has crafted, reinforcing compliance without visible enforcement. Social dynamics, loyalty, and internalized obligation all act as additional layers of invisible control, leaving the victim to defend the very conditions that limit their freedom. What was once subtle experimentation has matured into internalized obedience. Even attempts at independence are influenced by the architecture of perception already embedded in the mind. Memory itself is not safe. Past events are reinterpreted, selective omissions become forgotten, and the manipulator's role is reframed as guidance, care, or necessity. By the time the mind notices tension or unease, it is already too late. Patterns, habits, and perceptions have been molded into a reality that feels consistent and self-directed, yet every movement traces back to another's design. The collapse of awareness is thus not an external conquest, but an internal surrender, a quiet submission achieved through patience, precision, and the careful erosion of certainty, leaving the victim trapped in plain sight, defending the hand that guided them all along without realizing they are doing so. The final, haunting truth of this stage is that freedom becomes a concept, not a reality. Even when moments of clarity emerge, they are fleeting, often dismissed as overreaction, paranoia, or misperception. The victim doubts their own senses, remembering only fragments, interpreting events through the lens the manipulator has constructed over time. This ensures that attempts to resist are met not with force, but with the victim's own hesitation, guilt, or loyalty, a silent, self-administered discipline that secures control without confrontation. The manipulator, ever present yet invisible, watches as influence becomes habitual, automatic, and internalized, their strategy now sustained by the very person it ensnares. The collapse of awareness transforms the victim into a living instrument of their own constraint, an unwitting guardian of the system that subverts them. Every memory, every action, every choice becomes a node in the network of influence, and the manipulator need not intervene to maintain power. It has become self-reinforcing. This is the ultimate mastery of shadow tactics, the ability to guide, shape, and dominate not by visible force, but by the imperceptible erosion of certainty, the subtle redirection of thought, and the quiet surrender of perception. In the end, the victim moves, speaks, and decides as if free, yet every step, every word, and every belief bears the trace of someone else's design. And as the shadows stretch over the mind, as awareness itself crumbles, the terrifying realization emerges too late. The control was never hidden because it was invisible. It thrived in the spaces where no one thought to look, in the silent corridors of thought and emotion, right there in plain sight.